focus on what's important. I changed my hair. Hello, geeks, freaks, and all those unique. This is MC Frodis, and I'm as excited as only someone who has custom-made Boldly Goes Spock and Uhura dolls can be. We've gotten an official announcement from J.J. Abrams that a fourth Kelvinverse movie will be released in December 2023. To tell you how excited I am about all of this, I was actually in the process of writing a script as to why they need to continue the Kelvinverse. This just goes to show you that I need to manage my time better. But to be fair, I do have a full-time job and I go to school full-time. So if you want more videos from me, support me on Patreon and maybe I can work less and come out with more content for y'all. I've talked about my connection to the Kelvinverse before. If you've watched my ranking of the Star Trek properties, you'll see it's actually my favorite. I don't mean it's the best, but it's the one that most appeals to my id. Now let's get the naysaying out of the way. The I'll believe it when I see it crowd. It is true we've had rumors about a fourth Kelvin movie for a while. But there's a big difference between those times and this one. This isn't a rumor. This is an announcement by J.J. Abrams to Paramount investors. We have a date, we have a cast, a director, a screenwriter. This is more than we've had for any of the other projects. So today we're going to look at the new movie that's coming, why they're doing it, and what I hope we'll see in this Beyond the Beyond movie. One of the reasons why the dark part of me thought the Kelvinverse was dead in the water was because of Strange New Worlds. It seemed unlikely to me that Paramount would want to play around with an alternate timeline Kirk, Spock, and McCoy when they had Captain Pike and Lieutenant Spock on Strange New Worlds. But then, the more I think about it, the more it makes sense, especially in light of how these kinds of multimedia projects are working right now. If you think about all of the major genre franchises, most of them are experimenting with crossovers because, well, they want to be Marvel. Marvel has figured out the formula of creating this massive universe of movies, live-action television shows, and cartoons. They've perfected it so well that they've upped the ante by creating a multiverse, folding in previous continuities as alternate realities, as shown in Spider-Man No Way Home, and the upcoming Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. DC has dipped their toe into this with the CW television event Crisis on Infinite Earths, and will be doing it once again with the Flash movie adapting Flashpoint. Star Wars hasn't experimented with a multiverse, but they aren't shy about bringing elements from previous Legends continuity into the current one. They've also gone full out in bringing characters from their cartoons, comics, and books into live action, as seen with Ahsoka Tano, Cad Bane, Cobb Vanth, Black Chrysanthemum, and others. So where does this leave Star Trek? Personally, I think it's in a position to burst in a big way. Your average person on the street isn't going to put Star Trek in the same breath as Star Wars, Marvel, and DC right now. But it's ripe for it. With 5 current shows appealing to different demographics and a well-established fan base, I think the only thing that's missing is the cinematic element. But why go back to the Kelvinverse if it didn't do too well? Except it actually did pretty well. Adjusted for inflation, the Kelvinverse movies are 3 of the top 4 Star Trek movies. And while it's true Star Trek Beyond is the least financially successful of the bunch, it is one of the most critically successful, with its score on Rotten Tomatoes tying it for 3rd place with Wrath of Khan. Only First Contact and Star Trek 09 were higher rated by critics. And just as an aside, Star Trek Beyond was doomed to failure due to its poor promotion, which, considering it was the 50th anniversary of the Star Trek franchise, is pretty embarrassing. But I won't go into that too much. The movie actually did well, and it did well with people outside of the Star Trek core. Which is important. As much as we want stuff to just be made for the fans, for these franchises to remain successful, they need to be able to pull in new interest. As part of the decision to revive the Kelvinverse, they did do market testing to see if there was interest in a new Kelvin movie, and they found that that was the case. Star Trek has been making great strides in the last few years, with Discovery, Picard, Strange New Worlds, Prodigy, and Lower Decks. But it's still missing the cinematic element, and instead of coming up with something from scratch, they're looking to the perfectly good Kelvinverse, and I don't think anybody ever really lost interest in it behind the scenes. The reason why the Kelvinverse works better for movies than any of the current shows is that it was built specifically for film. It has major stars in it. The stories that they've done were made for movies. And it also doesn't carry the same baggage of needing to watch 4+ seasons as Discovery or Picard would. Bringing back the Kelvinverse also works into the current movie trend of bringing back older properties to fill out a multiverse. Sony has two Spider-Verses separate from the MCU, and DC has multiple Bat properties all in separate continuities, but they're all tied together via a multiverse. With Mirror Mirror and yesterday's Enterprise considered some of the best episodes of the franchise, Star Trek's really the OG multiverse, and the Kelvin timeline is built entirely on the concept of an alternate universe. So while we have Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, Patrick Stewart, and Michael Keaton coming back to roles they played decades ago, why not bring back the Kelvin characters with actors who still have a good few movies left in them? The thing I find the most intriguing with Abrams' statement about the fourth movie is this line: "We have a bunch of other stories that we're talking about that we think will be really exciting." The fourth Kelvin movie isn't the only thing they're doing. They're planning ahead. And really, that's how you have to do it these days. All of the major franchises have several movies in development. Star Trek's been pretty good about doing that with their television properties, but the iron is hot for them to hit the theaters again. So if I think that Star Trek's going to follow the trend of leaning into the multiversal aspect, do I think we're going to see Zachary Quinto and Ethan Peck on screen together? Oh yeah, I do. But before anyone says they met in '09 when Prime was Nimoy, it's ridiculously in character for Spock to not say, "BT Dubs, we met about 100 years ago when I was still a lieutenant." I also think there's a beautiful symmetry in having them meet. Spock Prime helped put Kelvin Spock on his path, and we could now have an older, established Kelvin Spock help Spock Prime when Spock Prime was the same age as Kelvin Spock in the '09 movie. To quote the creator of that other Star franchise, it's poetry. It rhymes. Whether or not the crossover happens in the movie or in Strange New Worlds can be debated, but what's important is creating synergy. Interest in one property can bring people to the other. Star Trek is actually in a better position than any of the other franchises for expansion. There are dozens of main characters that can be used, in stories spanning at this point thousands of years. There are currently 3 active time periods in Star Trek. Things aren't nearly as contained as Star Wars or Marvel, which are still trying to figure themselves out as their Skywalkers and Infinity Sagas have ended. So now that we've logicked the crap out of why the Kelvinverse is coming back, let's look at some of the things I'd like to see in the fourth Kelvin movie and beyond. Married Spock and Uhura. I would not be me if this wasn't the top of my list. I think I've made it very clear how I feel about these two. But it actually goes beyond my shippy heart. I don't know when the fourth movie is going to be set, but presumably it's several years after Beyond. Spock and Uhura have been in a relationship since before Star Trek '09. Yes, they had a brief breakup in Beyond, but they were back together by the end of the movie. We've seen them go through enough trials. This is a time-tested relationship. Just do it already. It's the logical progression in their characters. I don't even need it to be a huge part of the movie. Unless, hear me out on this. The writers love to put Spock in emotional distress. And there's one very perfect way to put him in emotional distress that they haven't played with yet. Picture it. They're in the midst of strife of the movie, and Spock is acting weird, super aggro. He's just not talking about it. He's also keeping his physical distance from Uhura. Then they're in a situation where they're close together. Maybe McCoy and Kirk are also with them just to make it super uncomfortable. And then Uhura drops the line, "Why didn't you tell me you were in Ponfar?" Spock's shaking and trying to say that it's still early and that the mission is too dire for him to worry about it right now. Boom! They've got a ticking clock for the mission now. Because if they don't solve it soon, Spock won't be able to take care of his Ponfar. And then, of course, once the danger is over, Spock throws Uhura over his shoulder caveman style and storms off, leaving the rest of the crew dumbfounded. During the promotion of Into Darkness, Zachary Quinto brought up how he wanted Ponfar to happen, so let's give it to him. But let's be serious. I'd be happy if they just had a little Vulcan finger kiss and McCoy snarked about Spock being a little more tolerable to be around since he married Uhura. Just do something with this relationship that's been a cornerstone of the last 3 movies. Chekhov is on the Reliant. Probably not the best segue in the world to talk about Ponfar than address this, but I really didn't want to be the first thing I talked about. The unfortunate thing about the new Kelvin movie is that Anton Yelchin, who played Ensign Pavel Chekhov, tragically died shortly before the release of Star Trek Beyond. I'm actually of the belief that one of the things that kept the fourth movie from being made is that the cast, who were all very close, were still mourning Yelchin, and it was difficult to imagine doing a movie without him. But now they feel it's a good time to come back and honor him instead. And I think the way to honor him is to let Chekhov live on. I'm not talking about recasting him. I just don't want to see Chekhov killed off. That worked for Leonard Nimoy's incarnation of Spock because you were honoring a long lifetime of work. But killing off Chekhov now just reminds everyone of how painfully short Yelchin's life was. It would be an honor to him to allow Chekhov to go into the galaxy and live the life Yelchin wasn't able. We also have the framework to do this, provided by the Prime Universe, in which Kelvin's always going to echo. Chekhov wasn't present in the animated series, and he was shown as the first officer on the USS Reliant in Wrath of Khan. Have a mention of how Chekhov has been taken onto the USS Reliant to serve as first officer. It's a tip to the hat to the other timeline and allows the character to live on beyond what we see. The filmmakers can extend the reference to the animated series by having Emrys and Erix on the ship. I would prefer them filling Chekhov's role than Jayla. That's not to say I don't want Jayla in the movie. I absolutely do. But she should be down in engineering with Montgomery Scotty. We also need to expand our cast past the core group. The hole left by Chekhov and Anton Yelchin is a big one. Honestly, I think it's going to take 3 new characters to do the job. Joanna McCoy. One of my reasons Star Trek Beyond is my favorite is that they finally figured out how to use Karl Urban's Bones McCoy. His interpretation of the character is pitch perfect, but the filmmakers struggled to find a good use for him. Star Trek Beyond finally managed it, pairing Bones with his TOS verbal sparring partner Spock. But I would love to see McCoy get a storyline of his own, and it's the one that's been sitting there since 1967. We've never had McCoy's daughter Joanna in any canonical media, and it's time it happened. We've dealt so much with Kirk and Spock's family drama in the Kelvinverse, I think it's time that McCoy had his shot. It would give us a look at another side of him, outside of being Kirk's friend and Spock's sparring partner. Heck, you could put them in the position to support Bones for once. I don't know what context Joanna should appear, only that she should. Michael Burnham. Did I say we dealt with Spock's family drama? Well, I'd like some more. Since the last Kelvin movie, we've had a big reveal in Spock's family life, that he had an adoptive sister in Michael Burnham, who has become one of the major characters in modern Trek. I want to see the Kelvin version of this character. This is part of the multiversal aspect of the new era of Trek, showing how even the current characters have an alternate timeline version. It's also very evident that Kelvin Spock is different than Prime Spock. I could see Michael Burnham being a linchpin in this. We know it was Michael's rejection of Spock that made him turn more to logic. Perhaps they have a better relationship in the Kelvinverse, thus Spock was more open to humans. Very open. I think it would be a really good opportunity to show how she's different in this different timeline. I think she's still Spock's sister, but maybe in this timeline, Michael, who we know likes to take the weight of the world on her shoulders, left Starfleet to found New Vulcan. Having an alternate Michael Burnham would really throw down a gauntlet that I think would be fascinating to explore. Bonus points for Sybok. I may hate that movie, but I live for House Solkar drama. Do him right for once. Sulu the Family Man. Star Trek Beyond created controversy by showing Sulu married to a man with a young daughter. I want to see more be done with this. Have it be more than just, look, we have a gay. Go into Sulu's issues about serving on a starship while his family is left behind. Maybe have them on the ship and show how difficult it is for Sulu to balance a family and his job. Give some personality to Ben and Demora. How old is Demora going to be at this point? Maybe we can do the Wesley Crusher child prodigy trope right this time by showing her interest in piloting. A diplomatic mission. The Kelvinverse movies have been pretty high-octane adventure up to now, but I wouldn't be opposed to slowing it down a little bit. Maybe doing a broad strokes version of Journey to Babel, with Michael Burnham as the ambassador in place of Sarek. R.I.P. Ben Cross. So many of the things I've been suggesting require a bit more of an intimate setting, less running around and more talking. Star Trek has always explored the diplomatic side of things. One of my favorite movies is The Undiscovered Country. In thinking about it, Spock slowly unraveling from Ponfar goes really well with him having to remain perfectly calm because of the diplomatic mission. Focusing on the diplomacy would also allow us to see another side of Chris Pine's Kirk that's so far been missing. We know him as an action hero, but we can see how he's grown and matured into a real captain. Dealing with the diplomatic side would also allow them to explore Uhura's position as a translator for the crew, which is something we don't get a lot of with them running around and blowing stuff up. And you know I'm always here for proactive Uhura. Gone on for a long time. Should probably speed round the rest. Volcanic Explosion on Twitter mentioned wanting Kirk in the green wraparound, and I'm here for that. Seeing Spock shirtless to counteract the Kelvin comics continually drawing him smooth-chested. That offends me. Not for movie 4, but once we get deeper into the Star Trek multiverse, give me Simon Grayson, because, mwah! A Beastie Boys song that's not Sabotage. I'd say Intergalactic, but that song mentions Spock by name. Could we get away with that? Anyway, as you can tell, I'm very excited by the idea of a fourth Kelvin movie, and I'm sure this is just the first of many videos I'm going to have on the topic. So be sure to subscribe to hear everything I have to say on it. Comment down below with what you want to see in the next Kelvinverse movie. If you want to support me, please visit my Patreon. You can get access to early videos, polls, and other things. You can also buy me a coffee, or you can go to my Redbubble and TeePublic to buy my geeky graphic designs. So until next time, live long, and may the Force be with you.